Now, what would you do if your government literally locked you away like an animal for crimes you didn't commit for 8.5 years of your prime? Well, you'd probably be bitter. You would probably be filled with hate. You may walk away from the faith, or at the very least, you would end up as a Sunday pew warming Christian that's not very involved in the tenets of our relationship with the Lord. Kent Hovind was different, though. Kent Hovind came out and he hit the ground running. He was never more ready for ministry than he was when he was released after 8.5 years in prison.
Well,
This is it, son.
this is it. 9 years in the making. You got a lot of people out there that have been praying for you. Thousands and thousands of testimonies coming in. People that have seen your tapes, and you're ready to get back out there. I know.
We are headed home now. We're in Mississippi. This Saturday, July 11th, will be the 9th anniversary of when the indictment was issued against me. It's been a long, interesting.
And you guys are all invited to the party this Saturday
Amen.
at 29 Cummings Road. So
My BOP, they give you this for free to go home.
you gotta be. I think they spent a good $3 on that
And
one.
these Chinese tennis shoes, yeah, they're good, $1.50. So I'm all set.
Well, we got some different clothes for you in the car.
Oh, you do?
We got some new clothes for you.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. Well, thank you guys for all your prayers. Anything else you want to say to them?
Well, it has been an amazing journey. God has been really good. I can see why so much of the Bible is written from prison. It just gives you a totally new perspective on 1,000 things, And it's coming to the world. It's happening now in many countries, and it's Christians in America are so not ready for what's about to hit that this is. I think it's. I'm glad in 1,000 ways that God let this happen. It hurt in 1,000 ways too.
Now, this is not to say that there were not hiccups, as there often are. There were definitely hiccups. For instance, wife number one, Joe, was so terrified of the IRS and the government trying to come after them again that she would end up filing for divorce. Now, Kent loved her very deeply, and by all accounts, Joe also loved Kent Hovind very deeply, and they shared 40 wonderful years of marriage together. But Joe did not want to walk around with the swinging axe above her head for the rest of her life. And without going into too much gruesome detail, poor Joe had a very hard time of her stay in prison. Florida, Pensacola, being the place where Kent and Joe were living at the time, is a no-fault state. So, unfortunately, Kent Hovind was not able to stop the divorce from going through. It was granted. And after 8.5 years being locked away from your loved ones and being kept away from the embrace of a woman, Kent Hovind would desperately be lonely, and believing that it is not good for a man to be alone, Kent Hovind decided to move on. And not only did he move on from Pensacola, Florida, and he relocated in the beautiful Lenox, Alabama. Things are going quite well. He is reshooting and updating a lot of his old intellectual property after starting over from scratch with nothing but the clothes on his back and an RV to live in. He contacts an old friend, Mary Tocco. Mary Tocco is an advocate against vaccinating children, and she had done a lot of work on the matter. She's actually known as one of the foremost experts on vaccinations for that side of the opinion. And to make this segment a little shorter, Kent Hovind and Mary Tocco would begin a brief courtship. They would eventually get married. Mary Tocco would relocate to Lenox, Alabama, and they would begin a marriage together running Dinosaur Adventureland. However, there were issues. A lot like Joe, Mary would constantly be in fear of the IRS, and it's something that caused a lot of conflict between her and Ken. Ken, seeing that you can play a little loose sometimes, maybe with some rules, and Mary wanting to cross every T and dot every I, even when it didn't require a cross or a T, out of fear that she, like Joe before her, would spend time in prison if the IRS ever decided to come sink their fangs back into the famed evangelist Ken Hovind ever again. Mary Toko reasonably wanted to protect herself. She went as far as requesting that in exchange for her staying and helping run the ministry, Kent Hovind establish multiple children of her onto the board. A 5-man board with her children running the majority of it. And she also wanted to implement other changes that made Kent Hovind uncomfortable. Not that they were unreasonable, but they made him uncomfortable. This brings us to a place where there's conflict. There is a separation, and because Kent Hovind is not willing to basically turn over running the entire ministry to her family so that Mary Toko can feel secure in her living circumstance, Kent Hovind denies the request, and it turns into an ultimatum, which Kent Hovind rejects, and Mary Toko leaves Kent Hovind. Kent tries to get Mary to return, out of reasonably fearing that she too will spend time in prison like Joe before her. She opts out of the marriage very desperately, and Mary Toko, again, out of reasonably...
Oh, and the saints go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, Lord, I want to be...
Hello, my name's Kent Hovind. I'm at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. We have 5 lakes on the property. We're going to build a Christian campground here. We've had 9 baptisms so far in this lake right here. If you want to come join us, come on down. If you want to help us build what we're building, go to drdino.com.
Now, a while passes, and Kent Hovind is now in a position where he is very lonely. He's running Dinosaur Adventureland. He is stressed out, and he is sad for companionship. And he feels like he was robbed by Satan. He feels like he was robbed of a family by the government. And he's lonely. And he's afraid that after all these years, he'll die alone. And due to the fact that the first wife left him and he was no longer in bondage to her, due to that fact, biblically, and also due to the fact that Mary Toko left Kent Hovind, so that he was not biblically bound to her either, we were introduced to Cindy Lincoln. Now, Cindy Lincoln is a huge stumbling block in the entire story. And I'm going to have to explain why.
Welcome to our Science Center, where God gets the glory for his creation instead of evolution, because we are sick of that. Our kids.
Okay, so Cindy Lincoln was a friend of Mary Toko. She lived at Dinosaur Adventureland, and she was a volunteer at the ministry. When Kent finally decided he was ready to start dating again, and he wanted to find a Mrs. Hovind for growing old together with.
Paradise in the beginning. It was the Garden of Eden. It was beautiful. Everybody would want to be there.
Cindy Lincoln volunteered her services as a wife to marry Kent. And oddly, Kent said yes, and he ended up married to Cindy Lincoln. Now, Cindy was a very kind wife for a year, and she was also a really good human being when she wanted to be, and she was a confidant for a good while, even to myself. But Cindy Lincoln also had some very dark issues. Now, I have a really interesting perspective on all of this because I actually know both people involved in the situation. And after leaving Dinosaur Adventureland on bad terms in 2020, with my family, I ended up becoming friends with Cindy Lincoln, and I would take her side on all of the matter. And her and I would plot to try to destroy Kent Hovind. We would go out of our way to find recordings and audio that she had illegally obtained of Kent. We would go through checking audio that Cindy had illegally obtained of Kent, and we would take things out of context and we would upload them to YouTube channels to make it public domain information that we could then share on public YouTube channels and we could use to try to destroy Kent Hovind. That was part one. Part two were the interviews. So we tried to gather as many former disgruntled volunteers as possible. We coached them into telling very heavy-handed, one-sided stories of events. So not actually lies, but very one-sided stories of a telling. And as I've heard it before, half a truth presented as the whole truth is no truth at all. What Cindy Lincoln and I did was wrong. We painted Kent Hovind to be a monster that he was not. And I ended up having many issues with Cindy Lincoln over time, and Cindy Lincoln would completely turn on me. Cindy would make Facebook posts because I was friends with Kent Hovind. Cindy would make YouTube videos exposing parts of my testimony, and she would go as far as reaching out to people's friends and families on their Facebook accounts, something she even did to Kent Hovind's wife. And she went out of her way to try to ruin everyone, taking vengeance for herself, stealing vengeance from God. That's how mentally ill Cindy Lincoln had become. And that was just the start of it. Finally, after listening to 80 hours of audio from Cindy Lincoln illegally, secretly recording Kent Hovind, I realized that after 80 hours of listening, Kent Hovind was not a bad husband. Kent Hovind was not a bad man. Kent Hovind was not a bad person. Kent Hovind was not even a bad pastor. Out of all the times that Cindy Lincoln called him out of his name, out of all the terrible things that she said and did to him, he never called her out of her name. He never raised his voice to her. He never told her to get lost. He never threatened to divorce her. Kent Hovind was kind. Kent Hovind was compassionate, and Kent Hovind did not know he was being recorded. That's something we can't forget. Cindy Lincoln, on the other hand, acted like a screaming banshee, and she did know she was recorded, but she just couldn't help herself. Cindy Lincoln couldn't control herself. Welcome home, Dr. Dino. So, Kent Hovind is free. Kent Hovind is reunited with his family, though be it for a very short time, which is heartbreaking. But things are looking up for Kent Hovind. He is getting his friendships back. He's getting recognition back. He's reestablishing his ministry, and he's ready to hit the ground running as